Hello and welcome to Stuff TV. I'm your host, Nick Huzar. I'm also the co founder of OfferUp, and I've spent a decade watching secondhand goods exchange hands and started to think a lot about my own existence and how I impact the planet. And I thought I could look on the internet and find answers easily, and I found it really confusing. So I just decided to start this podcast, interview really interesting thought leaders to help enlighten us with all things climate. And today I'm really excited to have Justin Stevens with us. Um, He's a venture capitalist with a company called Overlap Holdings. And let's talk about climate. Let's get into it. We'd love to, understand your background and kind of what is it that you do.
Great. Thanks again, Nick, for having me on the podcast. As you mentioned, Justin Stevens, founder and CEO of Overlap Holdings. Overlap is a venture capital firm, which by default makes me a venture capitalist. It is not something I'd always been for the first couple of decades of my career. I was actually in more traditional Wall Street finance. Became over to venture because of what I felt was things that were being done wrong, especially within frontier tech, the way that society was funding innovation, and I wanted to be part of change to the positive in that light. I know I just threw a lot of jargon out there with that first sentence or two, but let me kind of take a bunch of time to unpack all that and take you on a journey that explains kind of exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. To start at the top, the question a lot of people may be too embarrassed to ask: what is venture capital? People have, I think, kind of a vague idea, but maybe not the exact specifics. So to take that one down. Venture capital is really the practice of investing in early stage companies or ventures, if you will, or startups, with the goal of having those companies grow into really big companies. And so the small amount of money you invested in that early startup becomes worth a lot of money, and you make a big profit. So obviously, how is a small company expected to become a big company? Most small businesses fail or never, grow in sizes to that level. So the thing that many of the companies do that have in common is that they're leveraging some new technology, right? That allows them to either offer a better product to their customers, offer it at lower cost, or develop some new completely different product that nobody else offers. And so because of that, and because of how often technology is part of this equation, a lot of people kind of think about venture capital synonymously with investing in tech. And for today's purposes, I think that's a completely fine thing to do. We can just kind of assume for now that, venture investing is tech investing, or as I like to think about it, funding the future. So with that as background, we can see, I think a lot of people can understand why somebody would want to invest in a small, great company before it gets big. The most logical question is, well, why would that company want your money, right? Like if you owned a great company that had great technology, you'd probably want to keep that all for yourself if it grew big. The reason is that a lot of these companies doing really interesting innovation require a bunch of money to get from small to big, even before they can kind of make their first sale sometimes. And so they need investors in order to help them kind of do that. Why don't I kind of take an example, which I think would be really good to both crystallize that point and help people see the kind of investments that investors such as myself evaluate every day. So let's take as an example, the one problem you mentioned, climate, that a lot of people are aware of is, the amount of CO2 in the air, right? And so no matter what part of the political spectrum you are on, you probably agree that it would be better if we had less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Whether you think that global warming is a pressing problem or not, pollution is still not a good thing. We all want to breathe fresher air. And so there's a lot of companies out there, as you know, Nick, that focus on using carbon dioxide, the gas in the air, this pollutant, as a raw material to make some product that we use every day, which then, traps or sequesters this carbon dioxide so it's not in the atmosphere anymore. There's also a lot of companies, focused on substituting raw materials that are currently bad, right? Like companies that require oil to make their product. Plastics are a good example of a product that requires oil. I think we all agree, once again, no matter where we are in the political spectrum, that if we could drill less oil, that would be good for national security concerns, commodity price risks, all sorts of things. And so there are companies looking to replace, those petrochemicals, that oil, with something, that's easier to get. So what if I told you that there was a company that actually took carbon dioxide in the air and used it to make plastic bottles, which are currently made out of oil? So you're solving two problems. You're getting rid of carbon dioxide, and you're lowering the amount of oil that needs to be drilled for. If you're not somebody who lives with frontier tech and venture every day, you'd probably say, right, this is sorcery. There's
Yeah.
no way this is possible.
Witchcraft.
Exactly. It just sounds too good to be true. But the truth is, like, there's a lot of companies doing this sort of thing who have proven something out, at least at the lab scale. And we're actually invested in a company, for instance, that, turns plastic into carbon fiber and turns CO2 into carbon fiber or jet fuel. So these are things that are actually happening now. So imagine, if you will, a company where a scientist, is in a lab and she figures out a way to take carbon dioxide and turn it into plastic. She makes a square inch by square inch of plastic fully out of carbon dioxide and a few other little feedstocks. We would all say, wow, that's amazing. She has done an incredible thing for society, and that's wonderful. And that's absolutely true. The issue that this scientist faces, and many other people starting, these types of companies face, is it costs a lot of money to get from that 1 square inch of plastic to making tens of $1,000s of plastic bottles for people to drink their water.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole bunch of things. We can all think of some of them, right? First of all right, great. You made 1 square inch of plastic. Now we have to make many, many feet and yards and miles of it. Does that process that you did, does that hold up for that scale? Does this plastic have the type of characteristics that you would need in a plastic bottle? It can bend. It can resist certain temperatures. It's not toxic. Can you then, once you figure that out, can you then figure out how to scale it and make it at a cost that's affordable? Nobody's going to buy a plastic bottle if it costs $10,000. Nobody's going to buy that water, no matter how good the bottle is for the environment. And then you have to win over those bottle manufacturers and ultimate customers on your product, right? So there's a lot of steps along the way that takes years and tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And all of this requires people and research and lab equipment and manufacturing equipment all to do. And your typical scientist who works at a university or something, they don't have that money in their bank account, right? Nobody does, pretty much. And so what they do is they try to figure out ways to raise money. Once again, these companies are pre-revenue, right? You can't sell this square inch of plastic to anybody for any amount. So before you have that ability to sell that product, you need a whole lot of money. Mm-hmm. And that's where venture capitalists come in, right? Is they say, okay, I see this promising technology you invented. I want to give you some money in exchange for your company. And, we'll reach some sort of agreement of how much I should get. And then as that company grows, I'll benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. When you look at, some of the hottest areas in investing right now, it's either AI or climate, it seems. And I have this really interesting chart, which I'll pull up. But if you look back in 2012, the amount of dollars going into climate tech was like 1.9 billion. Last year, it was 40 billion. Like, it's just been huge to see the amount of change there. And I think you've got clearly government policy. You've got other smart people in this space attacking it. I'd be curious, your perspective, why that trend has occurred so quickly. Like, is it just because we have more data and we're like looking around and like, oh, bad things are happening out there? Like, why? What happened in the last 10 years?
Excellent question, Nick. I think it's a confluence of factors. I think actually the most important one is that people have started to make a lot of money in certain areas of renewables, right? So solar power has become a profitable way to make money. In fact, solar power with the combination of battery is actually like the marginal expense unit on the power curve in terms of what people are adding into their power grids. And so it's really that's been the flip. You saw a bunch of people pile into climate in kind of like 2010 to 2012 because of concerns around the planet, right? And that focus, but without enough infrastructure and like progress on the industrialization of these technologies. And so a lot of those companies went bankrupt and didn't make any money. And so you had kind of this, this long winter in climate for 7, 8, 9 years as things like solar have become bigger. And as they become profitable, you've seen this nice harmonization now where like government can come in and back these things because some of them are either profitable or very close to profitable. And so you're able to get these success stories that kind of have turned the tide, right?
The kind of areas of focus. That was my next question for you as you ratchet down. Like, it's such a complex area to think about. And, I do think there's a bunch of noise in the system. So what sectors are interesting to you? And do you think that's kind of kind of worked its way through a little bit through the system where people go, okay, now I'm going to focus on solar. This is proven out, you know.
Yeah. You bring an excellent point up, which I want to spend some time on because I think it gives people a very interesting view on this question of selection and specialization in venture, which is incredibly important, right? We did the overly simplistic view of like how, how a venture investor does what they do. And anybody who's seen Shark Tank has probably, has the basic beats down. To your point, it becomes, venture is a very specified game. And some investors only look at like a very specific type of deal. Let's say it's a former physician, they only want to do life science deals, right? Or it's a former industrialist, or it's a former software engineer. And so everybody has their little things. And also people come in at different parts of the life cycle. Some investors only want to invest right when that, new technology is invented. Others want to wait until it's established and they can invest in the factory, right? So you have this kind of very complex world. And we definitely don't have enough time on this podcast to dive into detail on that. I will mention people that on our website, overlapholdings.com, we have a lot of blog posts and resources that give kind of that next level of explanation in case people want it. But having said that, to your exact point, like how do VCs make that choice? And more importantly, what does it mean to society if they choose right or they choose wrong? And this is, if there's one thing that I think listeners take away from this, it's this point about like what this has a huge ramifications for the world. So let me kind of dive into, I very simplistically, I like to bifurcate the world of venture into two camps, right? There's people whose focus is, I want to make as much money as possible in as short a period of time with as little risk and as little work as possible, right? That's fine. A lot of people live their lives like that.
Is that even venture? I don't think that's even venture.
Well, within the scope of venture,
Yeah.
right? There's people who are, maybe the best way to call it is people wanting to do small incremental changes,
Okay,
right?
sure.
So we invest in tech that's kind of straightforward. Yeah, you're right. None of this is riskless, but we're kind of like, we just are going for the quick win. Like, how fast can we scale this? A lot of pure software companies fall into this camp, right? As an example, contrary to earlier example, like let's take a company that builds a better accounting software suite for medium-sized businesses, right? So we're not saving the world here, right? But there's a lot of medium-sized companies, and like I'm sure their accounting systems can be optimized. And so somebody gets 5 programmers together, they develop a system, they put it in the cloud, and they sell it a whole bunch of times, right? And you write software once, you sell it as many times as you want. It's straightforward. There's a lot of medium-sized companies. That company is going to probably have, like, if they do it right, have a lot of success, right? 2 problems with that world, right? First of all, if 5 programmers in a room can build it, 5 programmers in another room can displace it, right? So there's less kind of that, there's less of that market dominance that you would get in something, deeper and bolder. But also more importantly, it doesn't really help the world that much, right? And that's, once again, that's fine. But the question is, are we taking dollars away from the VCs who are doing the deeper things, right? And so that takes me to the second camp. The second camp, which is where Overlap spends our time, is in what we call frontier technology. Frontier tech is all about investing in companies doing deep, real, fundamental research and engineering that drives real fundamental step changes, right? Climate, life sciences, space, material science, all this sort of stuff, right? As you can tell by my passion, that's where my heart is. But also because, frontier tech investors say instead, their mindset is like, what are the biggest problems facing the world? And have people come up with solutions to those problems? And I want to back those. And even though it's more complicated and I have to learn about science and it's very capital intensive and we have to build factories, if we figure it all out, we're going to like really have a huge windfall, but also like we're going to be moving the needle. And to me, that's so important because, like, in my view, people look to venture to fund innovation. And if too much venture money is allocated towards the incremental stuff, we're not going to accomplish as much of this deep stuff that society needs to extend lives, increase productivity. If one kind of like analogy I love to use, Nick, and I think about this all the time, right? I think this really simplifies the essence of the problem. Let's say there were only 100 people in society who had the ability to kind of like allocate resources, get stuff done, right? Like, like movers and shakers, if you will. If you put all of those 100 people in a room and we said, all right, there's 2 problems we need to solve. We need to figure out how to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the air because it's polluting, climate change, and the 20 other reasons. And we also need a marginally better accounting software for medium-sized businesses. And we asked you, Nick, to decide how many people in that room should work on the climate problem and how many people should work on the accounting problem. I ask you, what would you pick?
You can never pay me to work on an accounting problem, so I'm biased. But yes, no,
So
it's no
probably
brainer.
100 is zero, right? Maybe 99 one. Maybe if your brother-in-law was, an accountant, you'd
Yeah.
say 98 two. Right now, the number in like the if you do the percentages of venture like investors where they're spending their time, the number is 30/70. We have 30% of venture money going to frontier tech problems, and we have
Mhm.
70% of it going towards these incremental issues. And to me, that's like a fundamental problem. And it's why I founded Overlap, because we want to
Yeah.
encourage through, you know, proselytizing and investing and advising and connecting more money to go into that frontier tech. We want to get that number way higher.
Yeah, way hard. Another thing I'm curious on your point of view is how you look at investment kind of time horizon. So, a lot of VCs traditionally will look at, 7 to 10 years. They have a certain IRR that they're trying to, get every single year for, invest their investors. I think some of the challenges that you mentioned, when I just from companies and folks I've chatted with in this space is kind of like you said, it takes sometimes it takes a long time just to even get the incubation phase right. Then you got to look at like decades plus. So like the return, yeah, it might be way more sizable, but the time horizon is much further. How do you think about that?
Absolutely. That is exactly, I think, the biggest. That's one of the biggest reasons why so many people go into that incremental bucket as opposed to that frontier bucket, right? And I think that you need to have long dated capital in order to make these frontier tech investments, which is why traditionally the main investors have been either large institutions or family offices, right? It's not something that somebody easily can kind of write a check if they have like everyday bills to pay. And that is a issue with the ecosystem and one that we have not solved yet. I think so much of what I seek to do is bring my knowledge of capital and structuring that I've developed for my 2 decades on Wall Street to help soften that blow or make it easier, right? And so one of the things we do when we're an investor in a company is help the founders. Well, at this given point, maybe debt is a better fit than equity, or can you lease that equipment instead of buying it? Or like, can we figure out ways to we call it kind of financial engineering, right? Like how can we help bring that in shorter? How can we build bridges over the what's called the valleys of death where there's not, places where there's not capital? Because every day we can bring that in earlier, we can therefore increase those returns, make it easier, and bring more investors into this market.
Yeah, one thing you said earlier that really resonated as I chat and connect with a lot of folks in this space is there's a lot of really smart people out there solving these problems and these or they're really amazing scientists, right? And they got this thing in a petri dish and like, look at this thing I figured out. And I mean, heck, just getting to that for a lot of people, like applaud them. That's awesome. And the next big challenge is like, now I got to scale this. And I think, the biggest thing I've observed here is, how do you get in to the supply chain or how do you get into the waste stream? Like I'm always focused on stuff because I think it's just abundant. I recently did an episode where I laid in a week's worth of my family's trash just so you can see how much stuff is around us. And I just kept looking at these things. And I think probably as a venture capitalist, you can kind of see the mosaic, right? You can kind of see the opportunities and how the parts fit. And like, okay, great. Well, why can't we just do this? And then you realize like, oh, and it just there's getting into supply chains. There's a lot of things that make it really challenging. So I'd be curious of like, how do you, it's always about traction. I think in a venture model, you want to
Right.
see something. Okay, great. Well, now show me you can get to here. But then you go, oh, I got to put some dollars to work before we can cross that chasm and show some scale. Like, do you think that's one of the bigger, I guess, impediments to climate is kind of what I'm talking about is getting that
Yeah.
scale and getting in there? Yeah.
Absolutely. And we kind of break this down into two sets of questions, right? And whenever we make an investment, right, I'm not a scientist or an operator, right? I'm a financier. And so whenever we make an investment, we like to have two different validators in each deal, right? And one of them is the scientist or the engineer who answers the question, like, will this work, right? Or can this work? And the other question is like, how are we going to get it to scale profitably, right? And that's the supply chain person. And to your point, in order to do this well, when you're and a lot of times this is what a venture capitalist can bring to the table if the founder doesn't have it, is a bench of industry people who understand these industries and have the relationships who can make those warm introductions, right? And we have that across chemicals and maritime and energy and industrial. So when we see a great company and we're helping them along, we say, well, you should also speak to this person who's going to open these doors for you, or tell you what that procurement person at that company is thinking about, and what their first 5 questions are going to be. Because it's you need all of this team and talent of experts, to kind of get these companies to the finish line. And that's part
Yeah.
of why we call it overlap, right? Is like somebody's interest and knowledge overlaps with somebody else's. And you really want that like chain link of a whole bunch of people that can kind of help the company through all of those stages in the life cycle.
Are you stage agnostic, or will you invest at the earliest and the latest of stages? How do you think about that?
Sure. So we have we invest mostly in the earlier stage, I would say, not in the super early stages. We like them to kind of, there's I think a lot of coterie of investors who are like that person, right at the lab, who's kind of, making those who's kind of working with the scientist to pull it out of the lab and do that first stage. That's like a very specialized niche area, and we have wonderful relationships with people that we love to interact with. And so we will interact with them and then figure out, and we'll be in touch with them of like when it gets big enough for us, then they hand it off to us and we kind of help on the next way to the pathway. In terms of the helping companies and connecting companies, we do that at every stage, and we have a variety of different ways that we build that business. But we are very focused on making sure that everybody in the ecosystem is helping each other. The beauty of Frontier Tech, it's very collaborative, because I think everybody there,
Yeah.
everybody in this ecosystem is mission oriented, and we all know that like we
Yeah.
want these companies to do great thing. We feel like we're doing things that help society, and like I said, there's not really competition in the traditional sense. Like everybody's kind of collaborating and trying to get to the right answer.
I've definitely noticed that versus kind of other things in the past. Nobody's telling me no. I'm like, I don't think I'm that good and convincing, but I am genuine. I am
Yeah,
genuine and trying to really focus on something that I think affects all 8 billion of us.
yeah,
And so I'm passionate about that, and just I think just curious, right? And I think that's
yeah.
really, I think these are fascinating macro things that are really big, and I like to think about that and like, okay, how can you affect the most people? Because there are some interesting companies, and then you look at it and go, oh, you're offsetting 100,000 pounds of CO2. Like it's not that interesting. You're not going to really move the needle. So I do think that's part of the challenge. What are things, if you look in your crystal ball, like you look out a decade, I think part of what makes venture capitalists and exciting is you get to see so many things, and you get to, like I said, look at the mosaic and make bets for what's to come way down the road. What are things, if you could look into your crystal ball, you say, wow, I hope a decade from now, these are some of the things that have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost was one that we, kicked off on, which is carbon as a feedstock, right? Using carbon dioxide as a raw material. I think that really has the ability to bend that curve and just, completely change the story, and kind of make it so that we can actually get, pollution and emissions under control. Those kind of repurposing molecules. I think we're in the early stages of that. Chemistry and material science were traditionally things that venture didn't spend a lot of time on. And so I'm excited for kind of that to happen. I think with the kind of I think there's a lot of work happening in biotech right now that's very interesting, as AI and machine learning, kind of go up to speed, and big data and all these sorts of techniques for processing data much faster, meld with new technologies that allow genes to be manipulated in different ways, such as CRISPR. I think you're going to see a lot of breakthroughs in terms of new therapies and discoveries and cures for diseases that come out of that. So those are kind of like the two for the world that I think are the most important. For the 5-year-old in me, I'm excited about space. Like, I just think that we're well on our way to, whether it's manufacturing in low Earth orbit and, lunar discovery and all that sort of stuff. I do think there's also some serious world positivity to that in the longer run, especially if there's certain things you could manufacture better from space that can really, help society, and, diversifying planets and all that. But there's definitely an element of just personal
So
enthusiasm.
if we could go to Mars, would you go?
No,
No, I'm not the first one on that ship, that's for sure.
I would love for other people to go, but I like being home, so that's a
Yeah.
little far from me.
What do you think about manufacturing on the moon?
So low Earth orbit manufacturing, i.e., manufacturing in a zero weight environment, is actually like a very interesting topic. Most people don't know that the International Space Station mostly functions as a laboratory, right? The
Yeah.
astronauts up there are doing science projects all day, trying to find some different things that are really a breakthrough in terms of being in a zero gravity or low gravity environment, allow certain things to happen when you manufacture them that you can't otherwise. The yield efficiency of carbon fibers for fiber optics, or sorry, for fiber optics, goes through the roof if you can, do them in zero gravity. Artificial retinas, I have a similar issue, and a lot of areas within pharmaceuticals similarly. And so doing all that stuff in a zero gravity environment has a lot of potential. We need to find those like one or two killer edge cases. And there's a lot of companies working on that. And I really hope they do.
Yeah, if you think about, I mean, the big innovation Elon Musk had was, why are we, burning 1 million gallons of gas to launch a space shuttle? And I always appreciated, some people have a love hate for Elon, but I do appreciate how he looks at complexity and simplifies it. He usually takes the problem and flips it upside down. And I think that's the real cool thing with SpaceX is, like, if they can keep driving those costs down, now you can do like some of the things you'd mentioned that I guess I never even thought of, like, building out, fake retinas in space. Like, that's crazy. But if you can
Yeah.
get the cost down there, like, you could do a lot more things out there, I guess.
And I think, technology has been such a democratizing force over time. And I think people lose that, don't realize that sometimes. And often when you're making the invention or the invention's coming up now, you have no idea where this is going down the road, right? Could anybody have guessed that the printing press would have triggered, worldwide literacy and reformation and all these sorts of things? Could anybody have guessed that electricity, which when it first, was utilized was for factories and mansions, would have become this massive democratizing force, throughout the world? I think there's so much amazing potential when technology is created for the right reasons and done with the right intentions. And so that for me is why it's such a calling, and it's so important to me that these precious dollars that and mind share and talent that we allocate towards discovery and the future are allocated appropriately and intelligently and in the best possible way we can.
Yeah. What about one other topic I know is that a lot of people are passionate about is energy. Is that an area that you're focused on? I know one of the biggest challenges that we have, and we're going to have in the next number of decades, is the amount of energy we're going to consume from the grid, especially when you look at EV adoption.
Yeah.
We're at like 4 to 5%, and with the plans of being at 70% of all vehicles by 2050. That's going to be a huge draw on the grid. And I know in the US, I think the best grid we have is our natural gas grid, but I know our electric grid is pretty bad. So is
Yeah.
that an area that you focus on much?
Absolutely. And what's interesting about energy is, it's a problem that like I said, there's been a whole lot of discovery that's happened over the past decade, right? And it's gotten to the point that solar power is the cheapest power to create for any given moment worth of energy,
That's
right?
right. Didn't we pass coal, like peak coal, like a few years ago? Or was it
Oh
last
yeah.
year even? Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. And
That's
so
great.
now the issue is actually the storing of the solar power
Yeah.
when the lights are out, which is bad. So solar, like energy, has kind of in many ways become a storage problem, which in many ways has become a raw material problem because we need cobalt and nickel and lithium and all these, materials which are typically mined out of the ground in not the most wonderful ways. And how do we recycle those better? And how do we get all that? And so oddly enough, energy is like an infrastructure problem and also a like metal and mineral problem. So to your point, these things get so stuff, right? Stuff just
Stuff.
gets really
Well, you like my
fascinating.
episode this week? It's coming called Energy X, which is rethinking lithium mining.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll be sure to catch up with them afterwards too.
Yeah. Well, I know we're almost at time here. I was trying to think of any other things that might be interesting to share. What if people are, watching this and say, "Hey, I'm working on something." Is there a way to reach out to you, or would you recommend they just go to your website?
Yeah, sure. I would say, I definitely recommend people check out our website. We have a form to kind of go through that way. If people are, if people are inventing products, the best way to do that is to look up, there's a variety of incubators and accelerators. Those are good things to look at. We're not the best fit for like, I have a new technology in a lab and I need to like, commercialize it. I think what people will find though, like within Twitter and LinkedIn, there's very active, happy, friendly communities of people encouraging investors. And so I recommend people to somewhat like go on their own journey and find new things. Don't take it from me. My journey is a result of where it took me, but things like My Climate Journey, ctvc.com, these are like resources for people that I highly recommend checking out, especially as they're like dipping that first toe in the water in frontier tech. You got to tap that inner 5-year-old and just ask why. And what you'll find is like when you ask why enough when there's a problem, you're going to get to an unsatisfactory answer and then try to figure out how to solve it.
Yeah. It's a fascinating space, and I really appreciate what you're doing and investing in these companies, because that's what it's going to take. It is a partnership. People have ideas, they have traction, but you need fuel, and that's where capital comes in. So I appreciate what you're doing, and thanks for giving me some time.
Thanks, Nick. I really appreciate it.